Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in this event to celebrate the launch of Maria Katsarou-Makin's new book, Group Dyna-Mix, Investigating Team Dynamics from Leaders to Corporate Gatekeepers. So I am Martin Liu of Lid Business Media, and we are the very fortunate publisher of Maria's book. So let me start by introducing to you our panelists for today. So starting with our author, Dr. Maria Katsarou-Makin. Maria is a doctor of psychology and a chartered psychologist. Most recently, she is the founder and managing director of the Leadership Psychology Institute, a consulting and coaching firm that helps leaders and organizations from around the world to make successful transitions. Maria has over 20 years of experience in organizational development and executive coaching, and has done extensive research in team dynamics. Maria is the author of 3 books, the latest one being today's focus, Group Dyna-Mix. So welcome to you, Maria.
Thank you.
We're also joined by 3 special guests. Firstly, we have Dr. Kathryn Stanley. Kathryn holds a doctorate in organizational psychology and has some 25 years experience facilitating change for different organizations. Most recently, she is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Holonix, based in the USA, which provides executive and team coaching to a wide variety of organizations. Kathryn is also an executive coach at Harvard Business School's Executive Education Advanced Manager Program, as well as being a visiting professor at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. Welcome, Kathryn, and thank you for your contribution today.
Thank you.
And then we have Dr. Miranda Ralston. Miranda is a doctor of psychology, specializing in leadership psychology. She has also conducted groundbreaking research in neuroscience. Together with Kathryn, she co-founded Holonix, where she is currently Chief Operating Officer. Prior to that, Miranda was on the teaching faculty of Williams James College in Massachusetts, where she was director of the Masters of Organizational Psychology program. Welcome, Miranda, and thank you also for your contribution today. And then finally, we have John Mark Williams. John is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Leadership and Management, which is the UK's leading professional membership body for leaders, managers, coaches, and mentors, and which this year celebrates its 75th anniversary. Prior to that, John's 25-year career has seen him in various senior positions, including at the UK Trade and Investment, Newcastle University, Gateway to London, Santander, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, and the Agile Business Consortium. John is also a non-executive director, board advisor, and regular keynote speaker. Welcome, John. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Delighted to be here.
So before our panelists begin, I would just like to encourage our audience to participate by using the chat function and asking questions for the panel or offering comments and viewpoints. And then we will try to get through as many of these as possible before the end of this session. So let's begin by first going to Maria. And perhaps, Maria, you could explain why you wrote your new book, Group Dyna-Mix, and what readers can expect from it.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Martin. And if it's okay, I'd like to just say thank you to the panelists, because we've heard quite scary titles here: CEO, leadership psychologist, this and that. And I also want to emphasize the connection that we all have. Clearly, you and I, we go back a long way. With John, I'm really honored to be a fellow at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and we're doing quite a lot of work. And Kathryn Stanley, She's not just the CEO of Holonix. I was honored and humbled to have her as my teacher. She is the instigator behind this book. I wouldn't have written it without, if she had not put that seed, if you like, in my brain. She was my supervisor as well at the doctorate. And I'm fortunate enough now to be friends and colleagues. And, of course, Miranda. We used to be together at the doctorate, and I can still remember how Miranda used to put things on people's brains and all that. So we've gone through quite a journey. So I just want to throw that human aspect as well. To answer your question, thank you for your question. Why I wrote this book? It's very, very important for me to ensure that this book does not come from a position of authority, but it rather comes from a position of curiosity. And it was my wish to share my experience with others who are equally fascinated by the topic of group dynamics. So I'm still learning about how groups and teams work and how I function or not in them, and I'm hoping that this book is going to be the springboard for some constructive discussions. One of my aims was to basically put something together that has research, but also trying not to be too academic, but at the same time be quite practical. And the other topic that I wanted to address in the book was the myth around high-performance teams and whether they actually exist or not. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Maria, for giving us that introduction to your book. So, I mean, unfortunately, we cannot, cover everything today, but there are probably 2 or 3 key topics we're focusing on with our panelists. And so perhaps a good place to start is by asking our panelists, why is team dynamics important to understand and manage, especially for leaders and in the context of high-performing teams? And perhaps I could ask John to lead us up on that.
Yeah, sure. And I think the importance of team dynamics arises out of almost a very simple fact, which comes out quite strongly in the book, which is actually that none of us exists in a vacuum, neither as individuals nor indeed as teams, actually. I think that's a really important point that comes out of the book very strongly. So we all need to interact with one another, and consequently, in a sense, we almost by it's a sort of, I don't know if you can have anything other than physical osmosis, but we become a team just by being, like we are now, whether virtually or physically, in the same space. So the importance of the dynamics of individuals within a team becomes inherent in how we experience that team, and also, from a leadership perspective, what we do with it and how we do it. So, we have no choice but to accept that teams have a dynamic. And I think that's the basis for the book, really.
Thank you, John. Would any of our other panelists like to add to John's comments there?
Sure. I've done a lot of work with teams over the years, and it's counterintuitive. You can get the best group of people who's so excited to dig into the work, but they don't take time to dig into the team and what the team's about. And so it's counterintuitive to do team maintenance, to set the team up for success by managing proactively the group dynamics that Maria writes about. And they don't do that until they hit a wall. So, the best teams will form their team and do all the things to make the team have a great dynamic. But it's just counterintuitive. They don't do it until they hit that wall. So I think Maria's book can help any team that might want to be setting up or might want to course correct because of that.
Excellent.
Absolutely. And one of my core beliefs is life isn't meant to be navigated alone. And it goes along with the fact that one of our most basic social needs is the need to belong, the need to feel like we are a part of the group. So it's no wonder that we're naturally driven to be in groups and to be in teams. And the problems that we face and the things that we try to accomplish tend to be really complex. So we need more people, we need more brains, we need more skills and energy to go into that. So the complexity of the problems, and then we match it up with human complexity. And it's no wonder also that sometimes we can rub in those teams. And Maria put a really great example in there of from Steve Jobs about teams being like the rock polisher. We go in there, we all have rough edges, and our teams kind of polish those off, and we come off as beautiful stones. So the book overall has all of these different ways that we can look at teams, the dynamics they have, from the hedgehog effect to the clash that we experience when we're communicating through Cantor's structural dynamics. There's so many ways that you can look at these through different lenses, and it's all in Maria's book. It's like the masterclass in getting team dynamics into a great place for your team. So highly recommend to all leaders and practitioners.
Mm. I was going to ask Maria, in writing and research and writing this book, was there anything that was surprising to you, given all the research you've already undertaken in this area?
I missed the first part of your question, Martin. I think you said, was there anything surprising for me? That's a good question. Surprising. Not really in this. I was more. I think I was coming across evidence of the things that I was reading and that I was seeing in research. So not in that sense. So maybe the one topic that still is, if you allow me the expression, still is bugging me is whether high performance teams actually exist or not. My take on that is that they don't exist in the sense we have them in mind. It's not a state that, okay, now I am a high performing team, I have arrived. It doesn't work like that. I think a team goes through cycles, and they may reach levels and states of where they are actually performing at those high levels, but it's not a state of arrival and I have conquered that and now I'm there. So I think that's the most not surprising, but the most interesting part, I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, one of the most common problems in teams, and that causes teams to be dysfunctional, relates to lack of psychological safety. Now, Kathryn and Miranda, I know that both of you have done a lot of work in this area. Perhaps we could ask you to explain what psychological safety really means. What does the climate of psychological safety look like, and how should leaders go about creating this climate within their teams and organizations?
Yeah, so psychological safety has become more popularized, and it's become a hot topic really in organizations as of recent. But it's not a new concept, and that's something that I think is really important. It's been talked about since the 60s from Shine and Bennis, and then Kahn brought it back in the 90s. So we've seen lots of research behind it, and it's finally starting to take hold in organizations, which is amazing. We also saw this really start to take hold after Google's amazing study that they did in 2016, Project Aristotle, where they looked at their most successful teams to try to figure out what it was that made them successful. And they found 5 factors. It was dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, impact, and psychological safety. But the big thing that came from their study was, without psychological safety, those other factors didn't matter. Psychological safety is the foundation to getting teams to perform and be successful. So that's why it's so important. Some of the other benefits are you make fewer mistakes. There's increased creativity and innovation, engagement, more learning behaviors, overall effectiveness just goes up. So what it is it's the feeling that you are safe to speak up, to share your ideas, your opinions, your concerns, problems that you see, and that you don't feel like you're going to be judged harshly. So in reality, it's the difference between hearing what needs to be said and those vital insights being buried in silence. So that's why it's so important that we get those voices in the room, sharing them, feeling like they can speak up and they're not going to face any kind of repercussions, because we need them in there. That's what we ask people to bring their whole self to work, all their experiences. If we're shutting them down with low psychological safety, they're not able to do that. So that's why it's so vital to increase psychological safety. And I'm going to pass it to Kathryn to talk a little bit about how we're doing that.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's great that I feel like it's finally come into its own in terms of acceptance in the business world. In some cases we're seeing like groundswell from everybody but the leadership, and the leadership trying to embrace it, because leaders are often, John, you're shaking your head, yeah, because leaders are often worried it's all on them. I think Maria's book, one of the things I love about it the most is she talks about how everybody has the power to change the team and team ownership. In my past working with teams, I've always called that team leadership, like everybody's a leader on the team. But what happened that just changed it is that movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter, people are coming to us, the leaders are coming to us, and the companies are coming to us wanting a speak up culture, because without psychological safety, I know this from my own innovation research, there's no learning. So there's no innovation. And right now we have so many big, tough problems that we need all our brains in the group. And psychological safety is the foundation of that. So leaders are coming to us, companies are coming to us wanting to increase retention, diversity, inclusion, innovation by having a more speak up culture. And there's so much research and innovation that overlaps with psych safety research about how when you can't speak up, disaster happens. So it's well documented, but people are finally really accepting it. And there's so many great things happening in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Dr. Kim Young-McClear, who's also a commander in the military here, has created a high-performance model, healthy to innovative framework about psych safety being the foundation to get to diversity, inclusion, and innovation. There's many, many others happening out there. So I'm psyched because I wanted to use this in the 90s. And leaders would be like, psych safety? What do you mean safe? We're all safe. The definition was, I'm physically safe, So it's nice that it's opening up and we're finally able to speak about it openly versus from the side, as a practitioner. Yeah.
Some people might say that having a climate of psychological safety challenges the status quo and may have an impact on the overall decision-making system within a company. What have you found those to be challenges for companies when they're implementing such a climate?
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, go ahead.
No, sorry, Kathy. I was going to say yes. Actually, when we talk to leaders about this, there is and this much of this comes through reading between the lines in the book, because of course the understanding of team dynamics, particularly this idea of leadership being in everybody, and creating a climate of psychological safety so that everybody can express that leadership capability. Understanding the dynamics of the team of which we're all part becomes increasingly important. From the perspective of leaders, though, and I'll use that word in inverted commas, leaders who have that authority in the hierarchy, one of the things that I think worries them a little bit is that, of course, with the cloak of authority come the lead boots of responsibility. So psychological safety is something that needs to be applied to the leadership figures as well as to all of the other members of a team. And we talk a lot about leaders being needing to be vulnerable, needing to be authentic, to allow themselves to be seen to be humble and stuff like this. Actually, that's quite difficult when we've got this long career of being elevated to a leadership position, and psychological safety has not been a part of that learning. So that really, I'm delighted to see it becoming common parlance in business and industry now, because the language will take us in the right direction. One last quick point, actually, if I may. Somebody, Layla Rao, who runs Lean In Agile, she said something to me the other day on a podcast which was tremendous, and it's very, very relevant to the book. She said, fear is fuel. And I thought, now, interesting, the context of psychological safety. Actually, psychological safety doesn't just mean everybody being nice to each other. Actually, there is a sort of, maybe not fear, but there's a tension, there's an element of something that motivates us, which actually is a sort of fear. And we need to be allowed, in a way, be allowed by our teams to feel that in order to operate at optimum level. So there's just some thoughts there planted, which came out when I was reading the book.
Kathryn, sorry, you wanted to say something as well?
on mute.
I was just going to say, let Maria go because she had a comment. Yeah.
You go first, it's fine.
It really was just similar to what John was saying. So yeah, please you go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Now, just to add another concept on what we're talking, which is usually not talked about, and that is that the concept of followership, because simply it's not sexy enough. So imagine if we had a program for followership, nobody would sign up because who wants to be a follower? But the thing is, followership actually underlines the concept of responsibility, what you all have been talking about. So if I want to be a good leader, first and outmost, I need to be a good follower. And that's where the responsibility lies. And with the if there's one thing we need to remember about psychological safety is that psychological safety equals performance. So it's not about being nice and hugging sessions or hugging trees or whatever. No offense to tree huggers. I know a friend of mine and she might actually be watching. So sorry I said that. So psychological safety is about performance. It's about companies, organizations, teams that have a high psychological safety. They actually have more arguments, but the constructive arguments, they have more challenge, which is the healthy challenge. So if there's one thing to remember, it's that.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem that there are, I guess, different leadership styles that have emerged recently. Do you think that it's very much to do with what people have been experiencing during the pandemic? I mean, are we seeing a new form of leadership where topics like psychological safety has become very much at the fore, and clearly that will have impact on the way groups function or teams function?
No doubt.
John, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's no doubt that one of the things, a couple of things the pandemic has done is accelerated things that were happening anyway, changes that were coming anyway, and also forced, and I'm thinking about leadership figures in particular here, forced leaders to recognise what adds value and what doesn't, because we couldn't afford to do lots of stuff that didn't add value. And one of the things that's emerged is understanding of teams and how they work is a value-adding competence in a leader. And the idea of things like psychological safety being a competitive advantage, that the sudden realisation of that has definitely changed, not just leadership understanding, but leadership behaviours, and for the better to quite a large extent, I think.
I agree with that. And I think that there's a new form of leadership, but there's also a new form of followership that has come from that. We can see that with the Great Resignation. Kathryn and I did a little research around that as well, just in terms of the expectations are shifting, the way that we're viewing work is shifting. And I think that the shift in leadership is in some ways maybe being forced or at least influenced by the change in followership as well. Like you said, it's a competitive advantage now in terms of retention to have a psychologically safe work environment. So, yeah.
I mean, trust is also a topic that's often discussed in the leadership realm. Trust in terms of group dynamics or team dynamics. What are your views in terms of how that is developing, especially during these post-pandemic times?
Gosh, I'm thinking about your study, Maria, which you should certainly talk about. And I think that trust has always been important, right? And you can have trust, though, and not psychological safety. Because of the pandemic, people have been, what I say, in their shadow. So people are a little burned out, or more than a little burned out. So they're irritable, they're not thinking straight, they might be snappy. And if you hold any power, whether it's power being a team member, or power from your expertise, or power from your leadership position, affirm power, and you snap at somebody because you're exhausted or tired or scared or whatever, then that can erode psychological safety as quickly as you've done that. So they are two separate things, and they're both important. But if I could pick, you want both, but psychological safety first. Because like I said, you can have some trust, but no psychological safety, and you'll have the same impact of people not speaking up, people, unconsciously calculating, should I say it, should I not? And, we see what happens. accidents, plane crashes, shuttle crashes, terrible things happen when you can't speak up. So they're connected, but they're not the same. Really critical. And Maria's full doctoral project was based on teams and trust and oxytocin, which she boiled down to a few pages in her book, which is incredible. So
I don't know how I did that, to be honest with you, Kathryn. I agree with you, and that reminds me of the podcast we've had with John in the Institute of Leadership and Management, and there's a continuation of that actually on Thursday. Trust is one of those blanket terms where if we were to ask for a definition, each one of us would have a different definition, and there are out there as many definitions as there are writers. I think what is important is for the team or the organization to make sure they have their own definition of trust, something that makes sense for them, and then also define it in behavioral terms. So what does that mean, so that we are able to observe? One definition, unfortunately I can't remember the researcher's name, they had distinguished trust between cognitive and affective. And they said that in organizations, they do encounter a lot of cognitive trust, which is, let's say, if Kathryn is my boss, I show cognitive trust, so I trust her capability. So that's cognitive. But I may not have affective trust. So if I have affective trust with Kathryn, it means that I'm okay to show my vulnerabilities, my weaknesses. I'm okay to share other stuff, personal stuff about my life and so on. And it's that second type of trust, if you like, that is the bond, the glue. So it's just another helpful way to think about trust and how it's different from psychological safety. Also, trust is dyadic. Does that word exist in English? So it's between you and I. But psychological safety is a climate. It's like an umbrella. It's bigger, and trust is part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I thought it was very interesting, Kathryn, when you mentioned that psychological safety, creating that kind of climate leads to greater learning and greater innovation. I mean, I do wonder whether that is something that companies really are missing out on in terms of it being a competitive advantage. And my question is, how, in your work, how have you related that to, management systems, and what has been the reaction been to, using psychological safety as a new form of learning and innovation?
As an org development practitioner, we're not like the dentist. So people aren't coming, well, I just want a health check and, just make sure things are good. They're coming to me because they have a terrible cavity. So they're always coming to me when things, I just want to preface it with that, when things are going horribly wrong. And when you start to dig in why, we're not innovating, the team's not getting along, we can't get this, out to the customer. And so they're already know something's really wrong. And digging deep into innovation, you learn very quickly that when you innovate, on a company level, on a group level, right? Not just invent. Invention is something that, is fun, but maybe doesn't get sold. And innovation is something that people actually will adopt and use. And when you do that, you have to learn, and there's different types of innovation. But for radical innovation, you're departing a new paradigm. It's not what's gone before. And often it's met with, you talked earlier, Martin, you asked a great question about change and how it impacts organizations, right? So radical innovations mean that all my knowledge, I'm working at this level, in the middle level, or delivering, I'm really competent at it and excellent at it. And suddenly we got to do things totally differently. I'm going into conscious incompetence. I'm worried about my job. How will people see me? I'm already a little nervous because will I be able to learn this, right? So you can see how safety starts to come in. Will I be judged negatively? MIT did a study that shows that there's a tax paid for a bad idea, just an idea, in a lot of companies and organizations. So how are we going to innovate without, usually it's, if you think I was a basketball player, so the bad, the bad idea is the pass to the person who might have the good idea that gets in the basket. Sorry for the sports analogy, but, but if there's a tax for that, you're going to shut up. You're just going to not do it. And that's that low safety. So there's no innovation without learning. And there's not a lot of learning that's spoken about without the safety. So it really is such a critical factor with innovation because we have to do things differently. And the world is at that point right now. I think the pandemic just made everybody say, I can't put up with this. The value migrated into things that are really meaningful to me personally. And I want to interact, in climates that allow for that, allow for my humanity, right? So factor all that in. People need Maria's book for one. There's a lot of change happening right now. It's just kind of exciting, frankly.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, is there anything else that Hans would like to add to Kathryn's insight on psychological safety? I mean, it's a fascinating topic, I must say. If not, then maybe we can just move on a little bit. I mean, basically, in the next part, I just wanted to touch on some practical tips and takeaways. So for leaders or indeed anyone working with and in teams, which I imagine would be the majority of our audience today, I would like to ask our panelists to provide us with one or two tips which we can take away today to help us develop more effective team dynamics. And perhaps we could start with John, if you don't mind, John, and then followed by Maria, Miranda, and Kathryn.
Sure, no worries. The first thing is buy Maria's book. That's the first thing that I would do, and I don't say that just because I'm here. Actually, it's full of really interesting stuff. But one of the most important things for me is the tip is to recognise, certainly from a leadership perspective, but also from everybody else within a group or a team, the smallest unit of effectiveness in an organisation is a team. Not an individual, not a group. If we want effectiveness, it's a bit like the difference between invention and innovation. If we want effectiveness, we need a team. That could be a team of two or more. So understanding the dynamics of how teams work is a vital leadership competency. And it's also a vital competency in all of the other members of the team. And that's why I think this book is actually really, really valuable, because it helps that process of understanding.
Thank you, John. Maria?
To be honest, I'm cheating. I'm looking for the page at the end of the book, trying to choose one. I think I think because I want people to remember this, so I think people remember provocative statements. So I think I'm going to give that. John is nodding because he knows which one I'm going to choose. And it's actually the title of a very old psychology book from 1972. And the title of that psychology book is, If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. Now that's a very provocative statement. And what the book is about is basically, there's this natural human tendency, and all of us will look up to God, to a leader, to somebody better, bigger than us, to save us, for something bigger, for the change. However, the thing is that the change starts with us. So if a team, a group, if a team needs to change, they need to actually start with them. We can have an army of gurus and external facilitators, but unless they want to do the work, nothing will happen. So I will leave you with that.
Thank you, Maria. Miranda, can you offer some practical tips for effective team dynamics?
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was making and committing time to working on those dynamics, talking about clarifying roles, goals, who's taking what tasks and accountability, and not falling back in those default modes, because these are relationships, and like any relationship, it takes work. So it's not a one and done. And you need to keep revisiting those things. And also under that goes psychological safety. Just because you might feel psychologically safe on your team doesn't mean everybody does. So not making those assumptions that everybody feels the same way I do about how our team is functioning. So making time and committing time to continuing that work throughout the time that you're working together.
Thank you. Kathryn, would you like to offer your tip?
Yeah, and Miranda's, just to build on that, taking that time, and then Maria's book offers two really, for me, they were like models that changed everything when I learned them. One is David Cantor's Structural Dynamics. It literally is a roadmap about how can I interact with other people and interpret other people's behaviors in a way that's kind and understanding and not judging and destructive. So I would definitely use that to understand the group dynamics around you and from your teammates. And then, of course, Otto Scharmer's Theory U, and she also offers Tuckman and some other group dynamics models I really love, like punctuated equilibrium. But those models normalize what's happening in a team. So you can be like, this is the best team in the world, and then you're fighting. That's normal, right? That's all teams face that. And Maria, your insight that there's the myth of high performance teaming is so wonderful because it's such a high bar, right? To get to, you're not always there. You don't stay there. And if you're learning as a team, you're going to start fighting each other at some point. And that's actually maybe a sign of a healthy team. So those two models are in the book, and they're life-changing for people who learn them. So another reason to get her book. But yeah, that would be my tip. Learn those and use them on your team.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly go to the chat box. And there's a very interesting question from Sarah. She says, thank you for this fascinating conversation. Her question is, how can we achieve effective team dynamics when working online, as many of us are doing so at the moment? I mean, that is a very contemporary question, which I think a lot of people would be quite interested in hearing your views on. So maybe we could start with Maria on that.
Yeah, sure. It's a big topic. So I'm already thinking, where do I start with that? And we have a lot of insight from the pandemic as well. However, there is also a lot of knowledge that we do have before the pandemic, which is something I'm mentioning in the book, which is the disinhibition effect, which I'll come to in a minute. The thing is that as humans, we're not hardwired to do this. We're not hardwired, obviously, to have a screen between each other. However, there's one thing I think we all need to remember that is very, very important, that feelings are much more contagious even than COVID-19. And we can actually affect somebody even through a screen. I think if there's one thing that a leader or anybody working online that needs to remember is that we are we are having an impact all the time on each other. And we can also do that via a screen through something which is called mirror neurons, which Miranda knows much more about. But we do that. We are hardwired to affect each other. So anything that we do in a physical environment, we just need to do a bit more when we are virtually, if that makes any sense. There are other things as well, but I'll leave it at that to allow the panelists to maybe have a view as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, Maria. John, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I sort of, the very succinct way I would put it, just picking up on what Marie was saying, was almost make more effort. We just have to do lots more of what we would do normally, in inverted commas. A bit like, so somebody used an analogy to me the other day. They said when we see people on stage or on screen, actually they've got masses more makeup on than they would normally wear in normal, ordinary life, meeting people. And it's because of the difference in perception in that context. The same is true, we just have to put masses more psychological makeup on in order to cope with the context of being screen to screen rather than face to face.
Interesting, thank you. Miranda, do you have a view on this?
Yeah, so Kathryn and I have actually done some work around this as well and used some of the models that Maria already has in her book, especially structural dynamics, and helping them communicate against it across those boundaries. And I agree, we do need to do more of the connecting and getting to know each other. It takes a little more effort, while also being cognizant of being zoomed out. We're not also meant to be sitting all the time. We're meant to be moving, and going from meeting to meeting is what we were used to for so long. So also being cognizant of those time boundaries, making sure there's 10 minutes between meetings, things like that really help, so that they can get up and go get a drink of water or just go outside for a couple of minutes, so that everybody's taking care of themselves so they can take care of each other.
Thank you. And Kathryn, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I was leading a hybrid organization for a long time, and there's a couple of things. Everything you do in person isn't just translatable to the screen. So like Miranda said, limit the time, people have to attend. But the other thing is hybrid meetings are like the scourge of most people's existence, because those who are online are often short-shrifted in terms of paying attention to them and their contributions, things like that. So really managing the online in-person room stuff is important, but also the online stuff. And so many leaders fight it, and they're forcing people to come back in the office, not realizing they're losing productivity because now there's a commute, and now there's more, stress on the person who has to reorganize their life. Reaching out in other ways and connecting through phone, through text, through, and extending that trust and finding ways to show results that you don't necessarily have to, ask the person. Like, is there a way, using shared files and shared documents to track things that makes sense versus just creates more work? And it's a massive shift everybody's going through about how to do this, right? And I think that embracing the technology and embracing the fact that because the value has migrated to this freedom and flexibility and not, the 24/7 work life is key. Like, when can you unplug from technology? That's the only thing about hybrid. Like, I'm in my home office right now and work is always here for me, right? Not necessarily the best balance. So I think leaders and companies and teams have to really just be human about it, figure out what the best way to connect is. And there's so much Jill Namira's work on creativity and virtual teams. There's so much work on there from fully remote companies like the book Rework and others. But there's a lot of companies who have done this for a long time and they're super successful, like Red Hat. So, there's a lot out there, and it really can work and be great. And it can be really awful if you're fighting and wanting it to be like the past, or just trying to mimic the online, the in the room on the online. That doesn't work. You have to get creative about using your tools. We do a lot of that with companies, so happy to talk more about it. But yeah, there's a lot you can do to make it great and fun and get the introverts to come out, by embracing some technology.
Yeah. To that point of Kathryn, we have a lot of research also from the psychotherapeutic field, and we know that there are people who actually share more when they are online, and they share even more when they're just on the phone, which is very, very surprising. Just doing a therapy or counseling on the phone, and people just open up because of what I said in the beginning, the disinhibition effect, which is basically, when we are live, we sort of pass our authority through the office, the way we dress, and so on, and all that disappears in when we have a screen or when we are on the phone, and we just try to replicate authority via a background or via other things. So it's also important to remember that there's not one size fits all, if that makes sense.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you, Maria. Just looking at some questions. There's a question from Michael F. for Maria. He asks, can there be a weak link in a high-performing team? If so, is the term team appropriate?
Okay. There's I need to think about that a bit more. The thing is, that gives me an opportunity to talk about the responsibility about the functioning of an effective team, and the responsibility. Let's say if we were a team, so if we are, let's say, 7 people, we all have 1/7 of the responsibility for the effective functioning of the team. Because we don't operate in a vacuum, the whole book, and me as a person, I believe in systems. So the whole book is written from that perspective. So because we don't exist in a vacuum, as John said in the beginning, I would need to know a bit more, what does being the weakest link mean? So that person, they might be reacting or responding or acting out on something else that is happening within the system. So I would need to know more about what does that mean, and why is there focus on that weakest link? We have cases of teams where they actually choose a scapegoat, and there is a reason for that scapegoat. So that I personally would need to know more information about that. I don't know, Kathryn and Miranda, from a structural dynamics perspective, if you would agree with that.
Totally agree with finding out why that they may be being used by the group to express something. And then, of course, there's just, all the things you wrote about in the book, social loafing, all these possibilities of behavior and what does it mean. And as you were talking, I was just like, that's a good old psychologist who wants to dig deeper to find out why first. It's critical.
Yeah, spot on.
One question I had myself was in relation to team dynamics. When you do see teams that are dysfunctional, what do you tend to look for to begin with when you're trying to resolve those issues?
My instant response is patterns. Patterns don't lie. Words lie, actions lie, patterns never lie. So what I like to watch, to observe is look what is happening within the team. So what is really happening? And that, again, going back to what Kathryn and Miranda said, the framework of structural dynamic is fantastic to be able to read the room, to read what is happening in front of you. But by what is happening, I mean what is said, what is not being said, what is done, what is not being done. All that is information, is data, and then you look at patterns of what's happening. So, yeah, I'm looking for patterns.
To build on that, it could be as simple as, who's speaking and who's not speaking. Is it the boss that's only speaking, the leader, or is it two other people? And why is it only them doing the work of the team? Especially in a really dysfunctional team, you don't see, sort of mutual communication going on. So there's a lot you can see just by looking at their behavior. And then we take one of these models and we're like, oh, it could be that, it could be this. And you explore that with the team. That's why when Miranda said what Maria has written and given the reader is so many amazing lenses to then say, is it that lens? Or yeah. And so I find myself using a lot of these models all the time to help explain to the team what they might be experiencing and then involve them in changing that.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example, which is, it's a classic one, the use of humor. So we often meet groups, and I'm not saying you should be against humor, that's not where I'm coming from, but one needs to observe, when does humor take place? So if you observe that it actually takes place when something really significant is said by a specific person, then you actually observe how the group, out of their awareness, that is the most fascinating thing, they're actually using that person and the humor to make the situation lighter. So then as a facilitator, you just need to feed that back to them. That usually they just look at you like, what? But yeah.
I would add to that actually and go as far as to say from an observational point of view, actually the sense of humour within a group will determine whether or not it's a team. Because somebody who joins a team who has a sense of humour which is different from the norm, if I can say that, within that team, will either not be in the team very long, or the team will become dysfunctional if there's no way to get rid of them from that team. Because I have found, and I say this not from a researcher's perspective, purely from an observer's perspective, that this is a behaviour outcome that results from humour being used within teams. I haven't observed teams with no humour in them, so it might be different.
In terms of putting together a team, a functioning team that is, what are the best tools that you found in doing that?
Sorry, what are the best, what? Sorry.
The best tools or methods that you found in putting together, in helping you to put together a functioning team?
I'm a bit biased. I'm a huge fan of structural dynamics. I really have been using that together with others. Just why? Because it basically, even though it's a deep tool, but it seems that people understand it and they get it, and also because you're looking at observable behavior, it gives you something to work with. That's why I just love it as a framework and as a tool.
Miranda, Kathryn, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that along with the structural dynamics, that's critical. That time in the beginning when the team is together to get to know each other, their background, what their aspirations are for the team and themselves. How are we going to communicate? What are our operating agreements or ground rules, and the values. So in other words, I want to be listened to. So what does that mean in our behavior? Maybe it means we don't interrupt, or we have a way to interrupt that's kind. These are the things we don't talk about because we're not focused on the work. Like I said earlier, it's the counterintuitive. You need to spend time there to create a psychological container that's safe for the team members and build this invisible container that teaches them how to act and how to react and how to manage conflict and how to manage difference. Structural dynamics is a measure of difference and gives you language to tell a structural story versus a moralistic, damning, judging story. So that time spent up front, it's often called the team charter, is something we do with our groups to really accelerate their performance going forward and to hold them together and sort of own the group dynamic from the start and have boundaries about what do we do when things go awry because we're under stress.
Absolutely. We also use psychological safety within all of that as well, including things like what I need to feel safe speaking up. They can share experiences from their past that maybe may come up for them if they want to speak up, but they're having an experience in that moment that they can't, and use language around it, especially with canter. Like I have an oppose, maybe my opposes have been smacked down in the past, but now I have the language to put it out there. And I need to know that I'm going to be heard in my team. So using psychological safety also to create that container and hold the group so that they can share what they need in order to learn, grow, speak up, share.
And if I could just add too, not so much the best tools, but two very common, maybe the two most common tools in putting together a team. The first one is the biased opinion of the person who's been given responsibility to put the team together. Because that, without a model that comes from our current panelists, most people would just say, well, I've observed these people or these teams before. Then the second one is pure trial and error. So these are two of the most common methods of putting together a team, which is what makes it, I guess, all the more important that we are upskilling people with books like Maria's to understand the challenges in biased opinions and trial and error.
Thank you, John. Very interesting. Just looking at the chat box, there's a very interesting comment from Max in relation to team dynamics and working online. He suggests that, sorry, it's been retracted. Excuse me. I'll move on to another question from Maria Katsarou-Makin. She asks, in companies that do not pay proper attention to the importance of soft skills and awareness, where do you propose to start from to convince them to start working in this direction? Is there any hope?
Hi, Maria. Thank you for being here. Well, there is a section in the book where I say that I can't remember how I call it. The illusion. Not all teams want to change. Not all organizations want to change, and that's okay. So, and also, those of you who may know the book Adaptive Leadership by Heifetz, the writers, the researchers actually emphasize the need again for this systemic approach and how you need allies, and it's not something you can do on your own. So, and I understand where Maria's comment is coming from, and she's very pro-change and, wants the best of people and so on. But you do need the support of others. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, just a very quick example. I did some work in a bank, actually, which is not. Banking is not notorious for its team ethos because it's a very, very competitive atmosphere. And the one of the things that's in the book actually around necessary leadership qualities, it talks about encouraging collaboration, Maria. And that was one of the things that they did in the bank, which actually got over this rabid competitiveness So they put people in teams and gave them a common goal. And actually, they had no choice but to collaborate because the teams were made of different people with different skills, etc. And they made it very plain that actually it was the commonality of the contribution that determined whether that team was successful or not. So even in a rabidly competitive, individualistic context like financial services, it is possible actually to get over that hump in the road of people's self-image as competitors and start them collaborating.
I just want to add that I've been on groups and they're not collaborating and they're actually going against each other. And it turns out often those teams who are supposed to be teams are incentivized to compete, literally, in terms of the reward systems that are set up, their pay. So when we were changing a lot of organizations in the 90s and the early 2000s from individual-based to team-based organizations, we had to really look at what's the team reward. And so are you incentivized to help your teammate? Or if by helping them, and this was the case in one organization I was in, you're actually losing money because they're getting the customer, not you, right? So the reward structures have to also be changed so that people are incentivized and not hurting their livelihood by helping somebody else. So, and that's how organizations used to be set up. So yeah, there's a lot you can do. And then the other thing that the comment reminded me of from Maria, the commenter, is that, you know, if you're in a company and that you want change, it's an employee's market right now, and you might want to look for a better company. You know, life is too short. Yeah.
Yes. Glad you said that, Kathryn.
I agree. And like Maria talked about, it's great to have it go from like top down and have collaborators throughout the organization and see those changes move through. But Kathryn and I, we were talking earlier about this in terms of it can be a groundswell. It can come from the bottom up. So there is influence there. And like Kathryn said, it is an employee's market and organizations do know that. So the groundswell can happen as long as you have lots of collaborators and some folks going with it.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of this great discussion. I mean, there's just so much we could talk about. It's so fascinating, I must say, even from my point of view. It's been a great pleasure being with you all today. I would like to first thank our special guests, Kathryn, Stanley, Miranda, Ralston, and John Mark Williams, for your great contribution and insights today. Thank you so much for that. I would like to thank you, our audience, for attending the event, and hope that you have found it interesting and valuable. The event is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube quite soon, in case you wanted to rewatch it or wanted your colleagues to do so. And so I want to give Maria the last word, but before doing so, on behalf of our audience, guests, and Lid Business Media, I would like to offer Maria our sincere congratulations on the publication of your new book, Group Dyna-Mix. Well done, Maria. It's such a pleasure to work with you. And this is our third book together, so it means a lot to be working with you again. So please, Maria, could you say
you made me emotional now. That's the problem, And it's I've been meaning to write something on leadership for quite some time, and then, as you know, life happened, and that resulted in the second book. But we are here now. We made it. So, as I said, I'm really, really hoping that it just be a springboard for constructive challenge and discussion on team dynamics, or on anybody that is interested in the topic. And as I say in the first page, this is dedicated to any maverick, any person who goes against the flow. So it's important to remember that. I really can't thank you enough for being here, everybody, and supporting this. This is just huge, and it means a lot to me. Thank you very, very much.
It's much deserved, Maria. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.